What happens when love isn't love at all? When the person who says I do is only saying it to take everything you have. In the heart of Africa, where traditions are sacred and love is meant to be forever, a wedding was said to unite two families, two hearts, and two destinies. But behind the music, the feasting, and the laughter, something darker was stirring. He was a man of honor, a son of legacy. She was the woman he believed God had sent. And together, they were about to stand before the altar. Until he heard something that shattered his world in one breath. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about greed, deception, and justice served cold. About a groom who discovered the truth too late, yet acted just in time. Before the kiss, before the vows, before the betrayal. There was Kofi. A man who learned that even at the altar, love can wear the mask of a lie. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Is it sunrise in Ghana, evening in London, or midnight in New York? Drop your location in the comments below, hit like, and subscribe to Stories by the King. Where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, lean in. Because this isn't just a wedding story. It's the day love met betrayal, and the groom turned heartbreak into justice. The village of Osejafo was a masterpiece of earth and light, nestled where the green hills met the bright, winding river. It was here that Kofi, the only son of a man who built his empire on cocoa and courage, first saw Efi. She was a flame in a field of dry grass, a captivating mix of grace and ambition. Kofi, a man whose kindness was as big as his father's wealth, saw in her only light, not the shadow of want. He was humble for his wealth, a scholar of the heart more than the ledger, and he loved Efi with the kind of fierce, pure love that the old women sang about in their moonlight tales. His father, Nanayo, a man whose eyes missed nothing, offered a quiet warning, "My son, the moon often shines brightest when the night is most dark. Her beauty is a gift, but her spirit, measure it well." Kofi, blinded by his happiness, simply smiled and said, "Father, you see the market in everyone. I see only my future." The wedding preparations were a spectacle, drums that called the ancestors, cooks that fed 1,000, and the shimmering silks bought from faraway lands. Kofi spared no expense, not because he wished to flaunt his wealth, but because he saw every detail as a testament to the depth of his devotion. He'd gifted Efi necklace, the lion's tear, passed down through his family, a single, perfect amber stone said to reveal the wearer's true heart when held in the palm of a loved one. Efi accepted the gift with practiced elegance, a flash of something unreadable in her eyes. It was a look that always vanished too quickly, a ghost of a shadow that Kofi would later wish he had chased down. He remembered one quiet afternoon, as they sat under the great Iroko tree, he'd confessed his deepest fear, "Efi, if the fortune were gone tomorrow, if I had only my 2 hands, would you still be here?" Efi had leaned in, placing her soft, cool hand on his cheek. Her response, whispered like a secret, was meant to reassure him, but now, on the morning of the wedding, it echoed as a haunting premonition. "Kofi, my love for you is not in your hands. It is in your heart. And your heart is precious." But the way her eyes darted past him, towards the gates of his family's grand compound, the momentary stiffness in her shoulders, it was a memory that refused to lie still. The villagers, dressed in their finest, began to gather outside the church, their anticipation a palpable energy. Kofi straightened his agboda, taking a deep breath, ready to step into his destiny, unaware that the path ahead was not an altar, but a devastating trap. He was waiting for his best man, his cousin, Kweku. Kweku was the shadow to Kofi's light, handsome, charming, but with an insatiable hunger that his meager upbringing had bred. When Kweku failed to appear, Kofi decided to walk into the vestry for a moment of quiet solitude before the momentous walk. He needed a moment to ground himself, to absorb the magnitude of the vows he was about to take. It was a quiet, unassuming space, thick with the scent of incense and old leather. He heard a whisper, and then another, the voice is too familiar, too close. He hesitated, listening, and that was when the fragile world he had built, brick by loving brick, began to shake and crumble. The voice was Kofi's, sharp and cold. The man's voice, a low rumble of agreement and sinister laughter, belonged to Kweku. Kofi's hands clenched into fists, the gold threads of his agbada digging into his skin, a small, physical pain that was nothing compared to the laceration of his soul. His wedding was a sham, his bride a thief, and his cousin a viper. He now knew what he had to do, a path paved with pain and ultimate, public truth. He turned silently from the vestry door, not towards the altar, but towards the deepest, most agonizing solitude he'd ever known. Kofi walked. He did not run, he did not rage, he simply walked away from the clamor of the wedding, his steps slow and deliberate, a man performing a painful ritual. He walked past the kitchens, past the dancers, and into the quiet sanctuary of his father's private study, a room lined with the wisdom of the ages and the scent of aged mahogany. He sat behind the great desk, his mind moving with the speed of a cheetah. The betrayal was not merely a broken heart, it was a plot against his entire family, a theft of the legacy his father had sweat and bled to build. Kofi and Kweku were after the control of Osejafo Holdings, and the wedding was their key. Kofi's love, he realized, had been the perfect, blinding camouflage for their greed. He had to think not as a heartbroken groom, but as the heir protecting his house. He reached for the heavy, old-fashioned telephone, his fingers punching in the number of his father's most trusted legal counsel, a man named Tond. The drums outside were still beating, a relentless, insistent rhythm of celebration and deception, and Kofi used their noise to shield his own actions. He spoke to Tond not in the language of distress, but with the crisp, authoritative tone of a man taking command. Tond, the security protocols must be activated. Every account, every vault, every asset. Lock it down. Nothing moves without my direct, written, signed order. And I mean nothing. This must be done now, before the ceremony begins. He then gave a final, crucial instruction, one that would make his revenge poetic and complete. Tond, sensing the gravity in the young man's voice, did not ask questions, he simply executed the orders. Kofi then called the local police commander, an old friend of Nanayo, and spoke in veiled, urgent terms about a threat of financial malice and potential public disturbance at the wedding. He was building his war, and he was building it fast. The emotional turmoil inside was a storm, but externally, he was a statue of resolute power. The most difficult call was to his father, Nanayo. The old man, already seated on his ceremonial chair awaiting the grand entrance, listened without interruption. When Kofi finished the terrible recounting of Kofi and Kweku's conversation, there was a long, painful silence on the line. "My son," Nanayo finally said, his voice a low, solid rumble, "I warned you about the beautiful flower. But you have acted not as a boy, but as the true son of your mother, with the heart of a lion. Now, go back. Do not let them see your pain. Turn their stage into your courtroom." Kofi wiped a tear he hadn't known he'd shed. His father's fate was the only balm to his wound. He then looked at the mirror. Gone was the joyful groom, in his place was a man of cold, hard focus. He adjusted his agbada, transforming the wedding garment into armor. He was ready to return. The drums stopped. The crowd hushed. A voice called out, "The bride." Kofi took his place, standing tall by the altar, waiting. Kofi walked in, a vision in cream and gold, her eyes scanning the crowd, not for Kofi's love, but for the faces of the village elders, the shareholders, the men who held the keys to the future. She looked at Kofi and offered a dazzling, yet utterly false, smile. Kweku, standing smugly to the side, met her gaze with a conspiratorial nod. They both believed they had won. The priest began the sacred rites, the air thick with tension only Kofi truly understood. He let the ceremony proceed, every word of the vow a knife in his back, yet he stood firm, waiting for his moment, waiting for the perfect, ultimate delivery of justice. The priest reached the pivotal moment, his voice resonating across the hushed assembly. Do you, Kofi, take Efi to be your lawfully wedded wife? Kofi looked at Efi, truly looked at her, and saw past the stunning facade to the hollow, greedy soul within. A profound calm settled over him, the peace that comes only with the absolute clarity of truth. He did not immediately answer. Instead, he stepped away from the altar, turning his back to the priest, and faced the entire assembly, a movement so unexpected it stole the breath from every throat. Efi's dazzling smile froze, a mask beginning to crack. Kofi's voice, when it came, was not a shout of anger, but a low, resonant pronouncement that carried effortlessly through the church. Before I answer that sacred question, I must correct an injustice. For weeks, a man of great integrity, a man who has built this family's legacy, has been absent from this gathering. I speak of my father, Nanayo. The crowd murmured, confused. Kofi continued, his eyes now fixed on Efi and Kweku. My father is a man who tests the foundation of a house before he builds the roof. And he tested this foundation, this marriage, too. He then raised a hand, and from the back of the church, dressed in the simple, humble clothes of the church's maintenance worker, walked Nanayo. He stood tall, the disguise now shed, his eyes wise and hard. My father, Kofi continued, his voice swelling with emotion and triumph, spent the last month here, not as my father, but as the silent gateman, the man who guarded the door to the vestry, the kitchen, and the secrets whispered in the shadows. He then pointed a resolute finger at Efi and Kweku, who stood pale and trembling, their carefully constructed wall dissolving around them. On this morning, the gateman, my father, had a plot. A plot to use my love and my name to seize our company and destroy our family. A plot hatched by the woman I was to marry, and the cousin I loved like a brother. Efi let out a small cry of denial, but the truth, spoken so simply, was already a chain around her neck. Kofi then turned back to the priest, his gaze unwavering, and gave his final, ultimate answer. No, father. I do not take this woman to be my wife. I stand here instead to perform a sacred duty, to protect my blood and my legacy. As if on cue, two discreetly dressed police officers moved to Efi and Kweku, calmly placing them under arrest for attempted corporate fraud and conspiracy. The shock in the church was absolute, the silence punctuated only by the painful gasp of Efi's mother. Kofi stood alone at the altar, the most powerful and heartbroken man in the village. He did not seek to hurt Efi's heart, which he knew was already empty. He sought to dismantle her greed, the true enemy of his peace. A long, slow silence followed the arrest. Kofi looked out at the assembled people, his people, and they saw not a humiliated groom, but a wise, strong leader. He had chosen honor over emotion, and truth over a lie. He then spoke one last time, his voice now gentle, filled with a quiet finality. This wedding is now a feast of gratitude, a feast for all of you who came to wish us well. For today, I did not lose a wife, I gained back my life, my family, and my sight. The lion has roared, and the house is safe. He smiled, a genuine, tear-streaked smile of relief and painful wisdom. He had not sought crude revenge, he had sought justice, a truth so public and undeniable it cleansed the village. Kofi walked over to his father, the wise old gateman, and hugged him fiercely. The crowd stood and cheered, a sound of respect replacing the sound of betrayal. And so, the sun did not set on a broken man, but on a man made whole by the courage to choose the bitter truth over the sweetest lie. The lion's tear necklace, still clutched in Efi's hand as she was led away, never had the chance to reveal her heart. Kofi's own strength had done that, saving him from a life lived in a gilded cage. The village never forgot the wedding that ended not in a kiss, but in a profound lesson. Kofi, the generous son, became Kofi, the wise leader. He did not marry immediately, choosing instead to focus on the things that cannot betray: service, community, and the quiet joy of a life lived with integrity. A year later, The only reminder of the great betrayal was the story itself, a story that became the village's favorite tale to tell, a powerful warning that the most valuable wealth is not what you own, but what you protect. Now, tell me, after this story of betrayal and ultimate justice, what is one lesson or piece of wisdom that you would carry with you from Kofi's reckoning? Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation of truth and honor going.